Yeah.
It's they're pumping out fabricated nonsense that's totally untethered to reality. And the moment you call these people out on it, they don't believe in dialogue in any way.
Yeah.
They'll slander you. They'll write your name on the bathroom wall. They'll scream at you. So the only thing to do is you got to hoax them. You got to have a non-traditional way to deal with people who are so fundamentally irrational.
I've come to a place where I think right now in 2017 we're in a strange spot where the institutions that used to help us keep some of this stuff in the lanes, what is acceptable, what's not acceptable, what's right and wrong, what's real and not real, whether it's true or not, that these institutions are crumbling, and by that I mean that media is crumbling, our political institutions seem to be crumbling.
Our
academic institutions, so that's the one I really want to get into with you. All of these things are starting to crumble. It's partly because information has changed so much.
I would argue that even worse than crumble, but...
What, you would say they're decimated already?
No, I would argue that the academy, certain sections of the academy, the sciences I think are doing very, very well. Mm-hmm. The humanities are in shambles, certain departments, anything tainted by postmodernism, particularly gender studies, the conceptual penis.
Okay, so let's pause for a second. So let's just go to the conceptual penis.
As a social construct.
As a social construct.
Right.
You wrote a hoax paper with James Lindsay.
Right.
And you got this published.
That we thought was extremely funny.
I mean, I read it. It's jaw-droppingly ridiculous.
Yeah, and it argued for climate change being responsible for the conceptual penis. Yeah, and I thought it was really funny. It was a satire.
Sort of the main takeaway of it is that the penis is not really a real thing. It's just this sort of amorphous idea.
Yeah, and we threw in a lot of moral jargon. We appealed to their moral sensibilities.
Okay, so why, Pete? You're an academic. Why would you write a hoax paper? Why would you mock the very institutions of which you are a member of?
Because I think that there are departments in the universities that are making a mockery of our institutions. So when you said crumbling, I don't think that's not the word I would have used, although it's accurate in a sense, but these people are fabricating not only their own knowledge bases, they're writing things in journals that they then cite that becomes knowledge. They're manufacturing ideas that are totally untethered to reality. This is how crazy this is. So look, I'm going to explain it. I'm going to try to explain this. You reel me in if this is unclear.
Okay.
But this idea is so crazy that anybody listening to this can say that can't possibly, this can't possibly be true. So this is the idea, and then I'm going to give you asked me about belief, I'm going to give you an analog in theology. Okay. So what these people do is that they have moral intuitions based upon Marxist thought, basically. I'll get to that in a second. So what they do to justify this is they manufacture their own epistemology, their own way to know that justifies the conclusions that they have, so that then they can go out and become activists. Now, quick detour.
Yeah.
One of the biggest problems facing the left right now is anybody who calls out a bad idea is viewed as somebody on the right. Mm-hmm. We've got to stop that.
I know a little something about this,
You know
Pete.
a little something about this.
Yeah.
A lot about this. So I'm going to give you an analogy in theology. So this guy, Alvin Plantinga, is a Christian philosopher. So he has these beliefs, they're actually more than that. They're claims about reality and about Jesus being the Son of God. So he realizes that there's no evidence that can take him there. Excuse me, so what does he do? He manufactures his own epistemology. He said, well, you know, we're going to say that there's this thing called the God sensor, and the God sensor, some people have it, and it allows you to, just as I apprehend the color red, so too do I apprehend God. So he makes an epistemology to justify these insane claims about the nature of reality. So just as he has done that, critical theory is that epistemology that is used, and I can explain that. It's complicated. I'm afraid we're going to lose people because we got a lot of terms we got to throw out. It's very complicated. But what I would like to attempt to do in this segment is to link the madness on campuses right now to the intellectual engines driving that madness. Mm-hmm. And make no mistake about it, these departments tainted by postmodernism are absolutely filled with zealots and morally motivated ideologues.
Okay, so I'll do a little catch up so that in case anyone's missing any of this. So first, let's talk about what is postmodernism. I know most of my audience knows that, but let's just do a couple definitions quick. So
so let's do the definition. So the Frankfurt School has this idea of, let's even go back for it. Let's go back to Karl Marx. Karl Marx was a philosopher. Oh, here's a bonus question. Why did Hitler hate Karl Marx?
I feel like there's a good punchline.
Well, it's not a joke, it's actually a Jew, because he was a Jew. And anything the Jews touched were
but otherwise
poisonous.
They each other.
I thought they were a great guy. No. Okay, so Marxist economics, and these people aren't Marxists, they're more Marxian would be a better term. Marxist economics looks at the world in terms of economic oppression. There are oppressor classes, etc. So they have, and then we'll get to the idea of postmodernism. It's simple and complicated. So they've taken this idea of these Marxian notions of oppressor classes and looked at them in terms of gender and race and for example, the patriarchy, and then they have hierarchically prioritized people within that list. So the patriarchy is white, heterosexual, cisgendered, which is a thing, males. And they want to. You're
at the top of this. You are a badass motherfucker.
I am absolutely top. But that's the other thing they do. Just like religion, they have their own defense mechanisms, and that's what they say. Well, you can't criticize it because you're a cisgendered white heterosexual male.
And is the ultimate irony of this that is prejudice. That is prejudging people because I could then sit here and go, wait a minute, Peter Boghossian, a white, straight, cisgendered male, I can prejudge you based on your immutable characteristics.
Okay, so this is indispensable to talk about. So you are using words based upon normal, ordinary definitions. I'll give you examples some more. It's like, so when you use racism, it's the way I use it. It's the way most people who haven't been indoctrinated by gender studies in the postmodern left. It's the idea that you do not judge people, particularly negatively, but you don't make judgments about people based upon an immutable characteristic like their skin color. But they've changed that definition to make it systemic racism. They've changed that definition to put in a power vector, a hierarchical power vector that only flows one way. So for example, in this, blacks cannot be racist against whites. So they have snuck, it's very sneaky, they've taken a normal word, added a moral component to it, and changed the definition of a word. Here's some, if I may give you some more examples, please. Like equality. Equality is a good thing, but they've shifted from equality to equity. Now, what does equity mean? Equity means, well, we need a certain number of people representative of the general population. 17% African Americans, we need to have 17%. But the problem is that they also want to take into account historical discrimination and a kind of reparations for that. So those numbers are even higher. So I think it can be summarized in Ruth Bader Ginsburg's quip or joke or whatever it is. How many female Supreme Court justices do you think there should be? 9. So it's not just, right? It's not just that we want equal representation. We want more because of past injustices. Go ahead, because we got to talk about deconstruction, we got to talk about violence, we got to talk about why all these things, when you understand them from this mindset, they're all coming from the same school of thought affected by critical theory. That's why the most.
So now let's define critical theory.
Yeah. So critical theory is this idea that that traditional power dynamics and and this is oversimplified, but it's a general idea from which we can have a starting point for a conversation. See, that's again, I thought to myself, I'm going to get 500 emails, and I'm just trying to, and it makes me, it makes me self-censor, and then I'm like, come on.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that's real. That's a real, I don't want to get lost in that.
Yeah.
That is a real thing. I mean, I find it for myself sometimes. I try to talk broadly about things because I want to communicate big ideas, and hopefully people will then read some books or watch some other videos or follow some other people on Twitter or whatever. And then even if you talk broadly, we'll be, well, you see, he swept over that.
Right, or he didn't know this. Or why didn't he talk about the Frankfurt School? Like, he didn't mention Horkheimer once, or Adorno, or all these guys, or that guy's. And you know, you just get to a point where all of that self-censoring, it's not. It diminishes the message. It's not good for you. It's not good for conversations. It's not good for. Okay, so anyway,
that's why I mentioned the Thinquisition at the top.
And
of the
I think that was. I heard that. Yeah, I think that was
Thinquisition right now. If you think for yourself and you are not afraid to buck the trend, they will come to get you. It's exactly what you're talking about. So critical theory.
So it's the idea that it's basically a Marxist idea. It's the idea that there are these entrenched power structures and entrenched power dynamics. And one of the things that we need to do is we need to recognize these, and then we need to overthrow them. We need to deconstruct these traditional hierarchies to make society more, that's the thing, more equitable, more fair, more what is it? It's complicated. So these kids protesting at Evergreen or what have, they don't just ex nihilo just get this idea that they're just gonna, no, they get this. These are coming out of specific departments in the university, and when they're asked, why do you do this, or what is this, they talk, well, my professor said this, and then this is the insane part that gets back to the conceptual beingness again, that these people have their own lines of literature. That is, these are intellectual cesspools. They have, that's going to get, so they have
hashtag intellectual cesspools. Yeah, I'm going to start using that one.
That they have manufactured what they think, that's why they have to, like with cultural appropriation, they have to import ideas like power, because it isn't, the whole thing is made up. It's completely fabricated because they want to overthrow these traditional hierarchies. So these kids get this idea from their professors, who then get promoted in tenure because they publish in journals and their stuff is almost never cited by anybody, but yet that's how you rise up. And then what happens is you have a whole canon of knowledge and you go out and teach people. And then you have diversity training, and the shame of this whole thing is that there is legitimacy to white power. There is legitimacy to some of this stuff. But the way that it's metastasized almost doesn't allow any kind of liberation. It does almost the exact opposite of what they want to do, because it gets you people like Trump. But one more thing I was saying. Yeah. But then what happens is it goes to colleges of education, and then they start teaching. And I think I told you my son has, in his geography, he has geography, civics. I can't remember. I'm looking at stuff. They've never even opened a map. They've never opened a map. They've never in civics class how many Supreme Court justices, legislative branch, how many Senate, none of that stuff. But he knows everything about the Black Panthers. But he knows everything about the civil rights. The civil rights movement is extremely important. Wonderful stuff. But it should not, we need to look, I'm looking at a map, kids need to know what country is above Canada. But anyway, all of this stuff gets back to certain departments in the university that are pumping out nonsense, that are indoctrinating people, and exactly like a religion, they have their own defensive structures. They're, being offended is the new thing. Inclusion is another word that they've changed the meaning of. So there is a direct line between, is this clear so far?
I'm with you. It's clear to me.
Yeah, okay. So
I'm a pretty good judge of what the audience.
Okay, so because if it's not clear, something needs to be unpacked. So they want to overthrow these traditional hierarchies, and they've manufactured their own base of scholarship to do so.
So how?
So that's why it's worse than crumbling. Because at least if something crumbles, something worse didn't take its place. Like if an alarm, like it's like having an alarm clock that rings randomly. So it's worse than just having an alarm clock that doesn't work. Yeah. It's they're pumping out fabricated nonsense that's totally untethered to reality, and the moment you call these people out on it, they don't believe in dialogue in any way. Yeah. They'll slander you, they'll write your name on the bathroom wall, they'll scream at you. So the only thing to do is you got to hoax them. You got to have a non-traditional way to deal with people who are so fundamentally irrational that they're not willing to have a conversation.
And that led you to writing this hoax and turning this thing on its head. I thought the best way to start this thing I don't like to look at my notes up front, but you had a line on your Patreon page that I thought summed up the whole damn thing pretty perfectly. Your Patreon bio says, creating journalism that defends science and free speech. You've come to the right show. All right.
I think so.
Yeah, okay. Should we talk about sex first? Should we just start with
Let's
sex?
start.
And then, because it all bleeds into one thing here.
Definitely, yeah.
Okay, you started as a neuroscientist, but you were sort of more attracted, for lack of a better word, to studying sex. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I decided to go back to school and do my PhD in neuroscience, and along the way I had the chance to do a placement in sexology. So I'd never heard of sex research before. I had no idea what it was, but it was so fascinating to me, and I thought it's crazy that we have the technology to look at people's brains and look at sexual arousal in the brain, and it tells us so much about what it means to be human. So from there I was hooked. I loved it. My PhD was in using brain imaging to look at paraphilias, which are atypical sexual interests, and hypersexuality in men. And I love research, I always will, but I made the decision to leave academia and work full-time as a journalist now because the climate had changed so much, even between when I started my PhD and when I finished.
Yeah, and that's why the stuff that you're talking about really is at the nexus of everything that I'm doing here, because now you're on the journalist side, but it's because of the hostility that you were facing on the academic side. So what is it that you were unearthing or studying that was so triggering to people?
Well, within sexology, you can't really study anything that isn't triggering. I'd say across the board, someone's going to get mad at you no matter what. But
even though you're really looking at facts, you're looking to find facts.
Yeah, exactly. And even with brain imaging, that's definitely, it's a growing field. The technology is legitimate, but no matter what, I think because sex is still considered very taboo, people will either project their own ideas and beliefs and values onto it, or they just don't see the value and they think, why is the government funding this? I feel really lucky being in Canada. We do have a pretty amazing scene in terms of sex research. And my colleagues do manage to get funding, so I think that's excellent. But my decision to leave academia, in the last 2 years, I noticed things were starting to go a bit weird in terms of the climate. And in terms of mainstream media, I was seeing piece after piece about transgender kids and how young children were socially transitioning, getting on blockers, pubertal blockers, and the media was basically saying this is the greatest thing, this is something that we should rejoice about, that these kids are so much better off after. But from a scientific perspective, the research actually shows that the majority of kids who are gender dysphoric actually outgrow their feelings. They're more likely to grow up to be gay in adulthood, not transgender. And so it makes sense for them to wait, not for them to socially transition at a young age. So I wanted to write a mainstream piece about this. And there's been a very long-standing history between trans activists and sex researchers, a very ugly history of activists going after sex researchers if they don't like what someone's study says or what they say publicly. So I thought about it for a long time. I wrote the piece and I sat on it probably for about 6 months, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to put it out. I asked a bunch of my colleagues and mentors, and they all said, you know what, the science is solid, but you know what's going to happen if you do put this out. And at the time I wanted to stay in academia, and I said, should I wait till I get tenure? And everyone told me, even if you have tenure nowadays, it's not going to protect you. You can still lose your job. So I decided eventually I couldn't stay quiet, and I thought I'm not going to stay in an environment where I can't speak the truth, and I can't even pursue questions that are meaningful anymore because I have to worry about who's going to get mad, and then I'm going to lose my money, my funding, and I'm going to lose my job. So that piece went out. It was called Why Transgender Kids Should Wait to Transition, and then I haven't looked back since.
Yeah, so I've read the piece before, but I reread it this morning before you got here. And there's a lot here. So how much of this is just blatantly a misunderstanding of science? Like, I think there's partly that you have a misunderstanding of science, and then you just have activists who just want you to bow to them all the time. Are you able to sort of quantify how much of the backlash is each?
I think, to be charitable, I try to look at the other side and give them, credit and try to, think that they have good intentions. Maybe people, it's pretty consistent. All 11 studies ever done on the topic of desistance, so this phenomenon I talked about where kids grow out of their feelings of gender dysphoria, all of them say the same thing. So the final statistic is about 60 to 90%. So this is the vast majority of kids. you can't really question those data. So I think what it could be is people, I mean, trans people have a history of having to deal with medical gatekeeping, of people telling them they don't really, what they feel isn't real. I do think gender dysphoria is a real phenomenon, and I do think we should have empathy for people who are suffering. So I think it could be coming from that, of that place of, well, we don't want people saying that this isn't a legitimate thing, or that trans people should be forced to not feel the way they do. But in terms of, you know, these children, we should be thinking about the best outcome. So it doesn't make sense for them to transition if that's not actually going to help them in the long term. I try to give people the benefit of the doubt, but I do think the activists, they, on some level, I think they know that they can bully sex researchers because of that history. They know that there's only so much an academic can do, and they've won a couple battles. So I think that's part of it as well.
How shocking was it to you when you were discussing this with colleagues, that they were kind of hinting you may want to wait on this thing? I mean, did you think that you'd be in that situation? And I'm wondering, did any of them sit on some other things because they were afraid too?
It was eye-opening, yeah. But I kind of knew. One, I guess, instance I can talk about is one colleague, Michael Bailey at Northwestern University. He wrote a book that upset transgender activists. And they went off after him ruthlessly. I mean, they really tried to destroy his life. And thankfully, you know, he's still considered one of the foremost experts in sexology internationally. But I would say that, you know, I've written about him previously. I think he's kind of been the poster boy as to why people are really terrified to say anything that goes against the trans narrative.
Yeah, so I think you've already hinted at this, and I know your work otherwise, but so you have no issue with trans people as people, just to be clear. This is purely about the science related to transitioning and hormone blockers and things of that nature of a certain age, where they're doing it as young as, I think you were writing about 14, right?
Oh, younger than that now? Well, yeah, I mean, if there's parental consent, definitely. And I have to say, for transgender adults, and I'd say even kids who reach puberty and still feel that way, I think transitioning is totally up to you. If that's what the path you decide to go, then power to you. I don't think there's it's anyone's business to tell you what to do at that point.
So are there basic parameters related to age then?
Well, there are in terms, so I don't work with children, I don't do clinical work anymore, but in terms of the research literature, usually clinicians will wait until puberty and see how the child feels at that time when the body starts changing, when they start having crushes on their peers and that kind of thing. And the research does show that when kids start to, you know, have crushes and start dating, and that can play a role in terms of how they feel about their bodies and whether they do outgrow it.
But just at that point, your whole body is in flux. Your mental state's in flux, your physical state's in flux. And as you said, what did you say a percentage on that of how many of them turn out to just, they happen to be
60 to
gay?
90, so yeah.
So 60 to 90% of the children undergoing these feelings turn out to be gay. And then I assume the ones that don't transition, probably most of them end up being okay with being gay, I would imagine, roughly.
Yeah, and I would say, even like, I grew up in the gay community. I have a lot of gay male friends, and they've said to me when I was young, I told my parents all the time I hated being a boy and I wanted to be a girl, and I am a girl, and why can't I become a girl? And now as a gay man, I'm so comfortable, I'm so happy. And they say to me, you know, I'm kind of glad I'm not growing up in this time, because I think I probably would have transitioned. Yeah,
well, that's why the external pressure seems so crazy to me, because you just don't know at that age. And even if you do know, waiting a little bit isn't gonna, for the science to flesh out, that's not gonna kill you. It's just hard talking about this even, you know?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, what people also aren't talking about is that for these kids, in some cases, the parents don't want a gay child. And this is what upsets me the most. So if you have a little boy who's very feminine, he's likely gonna grow up to be a gay man. But if you take that same little boy and allow him to transition to female, when he grows up, he's going to appear to be a straight woman. And so these parents are being lauded as progressive when really they're homophobic.
Oh, God, how perverse that is. That's interesting what you just said about a certain amount of gay men that grow up, you know, they wanted to be, or felt more like a girl or whatever, and then eventually grow out of it or okay, because I never felt that. Like, I played sports and I played video games and Transformers, all the things that my friends did, and I never felt like I was a girl or more effeminate. People always say to me that I don't seem gay, and I'm always like, I don't know what that, you know what I mean? Like, I'm married to a guy, you know what I mean? That's pretty gay. But I never had that. But that's sort of just interesting about the psychology of gay people in general. There are gay people that grow up feeling very effeminate, and there are gay men that grow up not feeling that way, and I'm sure there's women that grow up feeling very butch or whatever, and there's women that grow up that are, you know, lipstick lesbians and the whole thing. Have you done any research on any of that?
In terms of my research, no, but in terms of what studies have shown, it is about hormone levels in utero. So testosterone, if you are exposed to higher levels of testosterone in utero, you're more likely to be male typical and masculine when you're born. So whether you're male or female. So most boys are exposed to high levels of testosterone. So that explains when they're born why they are interested in male typical toys and activities. So for gay men, they were likely exposed to lower levels of testosterone, which is why they're more feminine. And the same with girls. If they're exposed to higher levels of testosterone, they're more likely to be masculine and lesbian.
Right. Even though there's obvious outliers.
Oh yeah, this is on average. On average, yeah.
All right, so let's talk about the natural sciences versus the social sciences. First, for the layman, what is the difference? They both have science in it, Gad. Come on.
Right. So the lay person will often use these sort of simplifying heuristics to determine what is science versus not. If you're wearing a lab coat, if you have a petri dish, right? If you have a couple of chemical formulas, that's science. Because to the average lay person, that's impenetrable. On the other hand, most people have, for example, a folk psychology. They have an innate sense of what psychology is. And therefore, to the extent that they feel that they could contribute, even though they might be lay people, somehow that's less impenetrable to them.
Right.
So they then will create this false dichotomy where chemistry and physics, that's real science, but sociology, you know, it's for people who couldn't hack it in physics. The reality is that the only difference is what are the phenomena that you're studying across these two general rubrics of science. In the social sciences, you're studying psychology, anthropology, economics, sociology. It could be as rigorous as the natural sciences. So let me give you an example. If you're a sociologist, you could study sociometry, which is, you know, for example, how does power diffuse within a network? And you could use very fancy mathematics, graph theory, to try to understand this. So the type of mathematical modeling that you would use to study how power diffuses within a network is actually a very fancy mathematical approach. But sociology has somehow been co-opted by the activists, right?
Yeah.
And so we then view it as being less scientific. But sciences simply means adhering truthfully to the scientific method. I posit a hypothesis. I think about the data that I would need to collect that would either falsify or not a hypothesis. I collect that data. I apply some sort of statistical analysis, some mathematical analysis to analyze the data, and then I go one way or the other. That could be just as applied if it's in economics or if it is in physics. So it is wrong, because I often get letters and emails from people asking me, well, is psychology really a science? I mean, of course it's a science.
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, what is more laudable than studying the most important organism that we know, called humans, right?
Yeah.
So it's not as though by the sheer nature of what physicists study, they are real scientists, but the sociologist is not. And by the way, I'm not trying to defend sociologists here, because I'm the one who's criticizing sociologists. But
Right.
usually I'm criticizing them for deviating from the scientific method. What makes them less scientists is that they become activists and not scientists. But you could be just as much as a scientist if you study something in business or if you study something in chemistry.
Yeah, it's interesting that you talk about activists, not scientists, because that's what I've been saying about journalists. These people are not doing true journalism and fact-finding anymore and reporting based on evidence. What they're doing is letting their own biases slam right into the middle of this thing.
And so one of the things that I will say differentiates the natural sciences from the social sciences, and that's very much at the heart of the work that I do. The natural sciences have organized trees of knowledge. So in physics, people agree on a set of core knowledge that at this point has become unassailable. Notwithstanding the fact that they still have the epistemic humility to say, oh, if new provisional, it's only provisional. If something now falsifies it, I'm willing to revise it.
Right.
But there is...
But the bedrock.
The bedrock is there. There's core knowledge that is now unassailable in physics and chemistry. There aren't chemists who are for the periodic table and chemists who are against it.
Right.
Therefore, you could build coherent trees of knowledge, or the term that I love to use, which was reintroduced into the common lexicon by E.O. Wilson,
the evolutionary biologist at Harvard, is consilience, unity of knowledge. So the natural sciences, by the nature of how they test theories, have these organized trees of knowledge. That's what's lacking in the social sciences. And the reason it's lacking is not because the social sciences are any less scientific, it's because it is easier for ideologies to creep into the social sciences, right? So if I'm a libertarian or a Marxist, I might study economics in a way that is very polluted by my personal ideology. So it's not that the social sciences are epistemologically any inherently less scientific than chemistry. It's that biases are easier to creep in.
Yeah, it's funny because I'll hear, and I talk to sometimes, someone's a leftist economist or a libertarian economist or whatever it is, and I always think it's kind of funny, like we all have our own beliefs. Economically, I'm a little more libertarian these days, but if you're studying something within the window of the way you want it to be, it by default is going to be a little screwy.
Absolutely. And as I said, it is naturally more difficult for your personal ideological biases to come into something that you're studying in organic chemistry. Although I should mention that there have been famous cases where even hard sciences have been deeply polluted by ideologies. So Lysenkoism, Lysenko was a Russian or Soviet Union geneticist who proposed a theory of genetics that he thought was more in line with Marxist philosophy. That was a wrong theory of genetics that led to massive famine and to the death of millions of people. So even, it's not as though hard scientists are inoculated from the possibility of being parasitized by some of these ideological biases.
Do you think it's too late for the hard sciences to be protected? Like, is it too late for them to turn their force field on? Because we do see this creeping now in biology. I mean, Bret Weinstein's been talking about this now, that now it's really reaching its hand into that, which could have horrific repercussions for society.
Well, listen, when a scientist in the 21st century, I'm speaking of myself right now, has to appear in front of the Canadian Senate to argue that there is such a thing as male and female, and that evolutionary biology is based on the recognition that there is sexual dimorphism in human. Sexual dimorphism is a fancy term for saying basically that there are evolved sex differences. Humans, males are bigger than females, right? That's a sexual dimorphism. So the fact that I have to appear in front of the Canadian Senate to actually argue these things demonstrates how far the snake has gone into the den.
Yeah, so in a weird way, your position as a evolutionary biologist is sort of right at the front of the type of person that this ideology would attack, right?
Just to correct, I'm an evolutionary psychologist.
Psychologist, sorry.
I apply evolutionary biology.
I just said biologist, sorry.
Although I apply evolutionary biological principles.
Sorry.
It's craziness, right? And the reason why I'm so, if you like, aware of the epistemological dichotomy between the natural and social sciences is because my scientific career of 20 plus years has really been straddling both these fields, right? I apply evolutionary biology to study consumer behavior. Consumer behavior would be construed as something within the social sciences. Evolutionary biology is something that is within the natural sciences. So I really am very much steeped in both cultures. And I see the extent to which it is easier for people to succumb to their personal biases in the social sciences. Let me just give you one example. If you start off with the premise that you can't agree on whether there is such a thing as innate sex differences or not, how could you from that starting point ever build a tree of knowledge that's organized? If at this most fundamental level we can't agree that there is such a thing as male or female, then we're done, we're cooked. Physicists don't suffer from that problem, and that's why they make much better progress than social scientists do.
So as someone that studies marketing and why we behave how we do, what turns us on, what turns us off, all of that, in a weird way, you were prepared for everything that was going to happen politically right now and what's happening on the academic front, because all of these things, they're all marketing in a way. Trump, it's marketing. Hillary marketed herself in a certain way. So the trends were all there.
Life is marketing.
Yeah.
So when people ask me, so what do you study as a professor of marketing? And I always answer them, everything you do in life is marketing. You market yourself on the mating market. We even use the euphemisms of the marketplace, right? You position yourself in the marketplace. You market yourself in the labor market. You market yourself to friends. You position yourself depending on whether you wish to belong to a group or not. Animals communicate with each other, right? When animals advertise, for example, when the peacock is literally engaging in conspicuous advertising. So everything in life is marketing. So one of the reasons why I was very much interested in applying all of my training in marketing is because that's, I think, where all the sexy stuff is, right? We take all of these principles from psychology, from economics, from biology, and then I apply them in areas that are of greatest import to most people.
Is there something kind of scary about that, though, that it's not that the best ideas will necessarily win, it's that the best marketed ideas will win, and those often are not the same things?
Very good point. Listen, I'm right now working on my next book, and I just connected with what appears to be a wonderful literary agent, and he actually made this exact point. He said, look, what's really important as we move forward with your book is how to market it, because there'll be people who will be very resistant to the ideas that you propose in that book. So again, everything is marketing.
So basically, if you want to, so did Trump, do you think, have, not to bring everything back to him, but he must have had, I guess, as a businessman and putting his name all over these things for the last 30 years, he had an innate understanding of exactly what you're talking about.
Absolutely. Well, listen, I could speak to one thing that he knew very well. He could completely read that many people, the silent majority, or certainly a sizable minority, if we're going to use the popular vote and all that, were fed up with political correctness and said, I'm going to be the anti-PC guy. And he bet pretty much everything on that, and it turns out that people responded to it, right? He could have equivocated, he could have been more careful with his words, but he flies off the handle because he realized that the general atmosphere was most people, whether they're having chats on Facebook or at their workplace by the water cooler, at the university, are tired of feeling stifled, are tired of feeling scared of the next syllable that they might misutter that might ruin their careers. And he said, I am the anti-PC warrior, and people responded to that marketing position.
It's very clear. You don't enjoy telling the story. I don't think you're looking at yourself as you're some kind of hero or something. You just did what you felt was right, but it is interesting because that's 30 years ago at this point. And over the last 30 years, you've done a lot of things that have been to fight real racism, and you have a track record of it. And I think it's important because these days, when we tar and feather everybody, we seem to throw out everything they've ever done and try to catch them on one word they said wrong or one sentence out of context or any of that. So I'm glad we got that out. So now let's get to the present.
Sure.
Okay, so Evergreen has done something called a Day of Absence for years now. It sounds like it's since the 1970s. Can you tell me what the Day of Absence is? Because that's what got us to where we are now.
So at Evergreen, it's a yearly event, and it's predicated on a Douglas Turner Ward. He's a black playwright, a play that he wrote, I think, in 1965. And the central conceit of the play is that the underappreciated black population of a southern town decides to emphasize to the white population its value by not showing up one day. And although I haven't seen the play performed, I've read a good bit of it, and chaos erupts because the black population is so central to the functioning of the town. The play, I think, is typically put on with black actors in whiteface, which is interesting too. So anyway, Evergreen decided not too long after its founding that I think it was originally black faculty. It's now people of color more generally, but black faculty decided that the black population of Evergreen should ceremonially absent themselves to make the same point that the play makes. And this has gone on until I arrived and continued up until this year.
So something changed this year. So and that's where this all begins. So what changed this year? So basically, you had no problem with that.
I had no problem with it happening. I don't find anything wrong with it. I have one concern about it, which is that a college is not a town. And so when the black population of Evergreen, or later the people of color, don't show up, the college does not grind to a halt. So I have a concern that it doesn't quite make the point that it's supposed to make. But I have no problem with the desire to make that point, and I have no desire with people deciding to absent themselves. That's all.
Right. So you have what could be an academic concern if there were supposed to be a test that day or some other thing, but not a concern about the specifics of the premise of what these people are doing.
I find nothing wrong with it.
Okay, and this has gone on, as you said, since the 70s. You've been part of this for a long time. No problem. What changed this year?
So this year, the organizers, I understand now from reading the school paper, that the organizers, in response to Trump's election, decided to reverse the order of things. So the organizers are people of color, at least overwhelmingly. The school paper reports them as simply people of color. They decided to reverse the order and have white people not show up to campus. And I thought about that. When I first heard it, I thought I must have misunderstood what was being said. It's possible that my reaction is different than it might be because I'm Jewish, and alarm bells go off when I'm told I'm not supposed to be somewhere. Mm-hmm. But in any case, I thought I had misheard it, and I put it aside, and then there were several emails. So it was announced at a faculty meeting, and then there were several emails inviting people to commit to participate, but no clarification that that was the structure.
Yeah.
And then,
was it an ask or a tell? Because I think that's an important
distinction. Let's be very careful about this.
Yeah.
There was no implication that white people would not be allowed on campus.
Okay.
There was, however, the implication, when this finally was described, the implication was that white allies would be off campus. And therefore, there was the implication that if you were white and you showed up on campus, that you were therefore not an ally. And that is the thing that pushed me to respond. I did not like the implication that by the very act of being there, I was not allying with people of color. That is not my understanding. Right.
Okay. So there's this meeting. This is discussed. You then realize that what you had sort of feared was happening here. You then wrote a letter. Now we're going to put the letter up, but I want you just to paraphrase it. I was going to have you read the whole thing, but I think that may be a bit much. But we'll also post links to it down below, and it's out there on Twitter and everywhere else. Can you give me the thrust of what your letter, who was your letter to, and what was the thrust of the letter?
I sent the letter to the all faculty and staff distribution list, which does contain a fair number of students. I think there are a few hundred students who have a staff position of some kind or other, and so are on the list. So I sent it to that list, knowing that it would go to those people, not expecting it to be public, but I was very clear, and I think I wrote very carefully. And what I said was that there is all the difference in the world between a population absenting themselves from a shared space and a population telling another population to go away. Mm-hmm. And my point was that speech has to be free on a college campus and that everybody has to be free to be there. I thought that the point was so clear that it couldn't really be missed. And I was shocked at how far off the mark the response was.
Yeah.
There was an overwhelming reaction in public saying that I was effectively attacking people of color. Privately, there was a good bit of support, but this has now become a pattern on our campus where, especially surrounding any issue that at least nominally has a pro-equity side, that there is there's a nuanced understanding that can only be discussed sotto voce, and then there is the public response, which embraces this one side, giving the impression of consensus. But only if you're the person that people are quietly approaching do you know that there is no consensus. There's wide disagreement.
Right. Okay, so there's a couple things we should just clean up there. So to be clear, they were not telling specifically white students that they couldn't come, but as you said, it would have, the idea of then a white student showing up, in effect, this white student would have been seen as the enemy. It's possible they wouldn't have even known. They would have shown up to campus and been seen as a bad guy or a racist or a bigot or a white supremacist or any of that stuff. That's number one. But you mentioned that when it got public. So you said that the letter went to all staff?
All staff and faculty.
All staff and faculty. And there are some students on that, and that's how it got to the college paper, correct?
Yeah, the college paper picked up on it from there. I do want to say that the question of whether or not it was, or how okay it was for white people to be on campus, was accidentally tested during the event. So when the day of absence arrived, a friend of mine, a faculty member, actually somebody who's been with the college almost since its founding, a Greek woman, misunderstood the intention. And she thought that the intention was for the opening ceremony of the day of absence to include people from all races, which would make sense to me, and that then people would go off campus, and there were 200 spaces in an off-campus venue for particular events. But those 200 spaces were not the limit of white people leaving campus. So anyway, my friend went with her students to the opening ceremony of the day of absence, and it was held in the Longhouse, which is an indigenous structure that we're very proud of, rightly, on our campus. And she went in and apparently was approached by one of the organizers of Day of Absence and told that while she could decide to stay, that really this event was not for people of her skin tone. And she decided on that basis to leave. And as she left, apparently, an indigenous woman who is affiliated with the Longhouse, in dismay, apparently turned to her and said, "The Longhouse is a place of welcome," dismayed that she was being turned away. And then she talked to her students, the faculty member talked to her students, and they had felt very uncomfortable the way they were being looked at. So there is nothing, there was no requirement that any particular person be any particular place, but there was extreme coercion.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the other indigenous person there that says that this is a place of welcoming, because there is a sense amongst those of us that talk about what's happening on college campuses right now that the inmates run the asylum. And unfortunately, we know that the loudest, and we're going to show some videos of some of the people, that the loudest people get the most attention. Then it seems like it's everyone. But a lot of it also is just a culture now of fear, where someone like this, there's probably many other people like this, but they're just afraid to say, no, 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 we know you're an ally, we know you're not a racist, or whatever it is. You are welcome here to show solidarity with us.
Well, there is a tremendous amount of structure inside the larger coalition of people of color. So within that, there are relationships that are not transparent to the outside, and every so often one gets a glimpse. And so there is a tension between, I think, a very aggressive vision on the one side and a much more traditional vision of equity on the other. But the tension is not visible, and because it's not visible, there's this sense that, that this is a two-sided issue.
Yeah. Okay. So we're gonna show two videos here, because there are two reactions. Well, there's several reactions happening here at once. But in terms of what's happening on campus, there's the student reaction and the academic reaction. And they're sort of connected, but they also come from very different places. So we're going to start with the student reaction. This is you. I think you're standing outside your office, and
No, this is outside my classroom.
This is outside your classroom. Okay.
Yeah, the students came to my classroom and started chanting. I had divided my class up to have several discussions, and one of my students in one of those discussions alerted me that there were people outside the door chanting, "Hey, hey, ho, ho, Bret Weinstein's got to go." That doesn't happen every day. So, so I walked out to them. I opened the door. They clearly knew exactly who I was. And I said, "What's up?" And they told me I should resign. And I said, "Would you like to talk about this?" And they said, "Yes." And I said, "Okay, let's go to the 4th floor. I got students on 1, 2, and 3. They said, "No, then we're going to 1, 2, and 3. I came into the building, disrupted really the whole building, not just my class. And then they confronted me with several of my students right there in front of the classroom that we were assigned for that day.
Okay, so let's leave it right there. We're going to play the video. And just to be clear, this was the first moment that you realized this thing had escalated, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, all right, so let's play this one.
Wait a second. No, it is. Debate means you are trying to win. Dialectic means you are using disagreement to discover what is true. I am not interested in debate. I am interested only in dialectic, which does mean I listen to you and you listen to me.
We don't care what terms you want to speak on. This is not about you.
I'm talking all about him.
On terms of white privilege. This is not a discussion. You have lost that one.
I am talking about terms that serve the truth. Those are the terms.
House of Dialectic. You said some racist shit. Can you apologize?
I did not. Okay. You don't know. Emails and target students of color.
Nothing racist about it.
Do I think that black students in sciences are targeted here? Do I think they're targeted anywhere?
Speak to what you know and speak to the truth.
Okay. I do not believe that students of color are targeted in the sciences here.
Why?
But maybe I misunderstand what you mean by targeted.
Targeted by racism.
Oh my God.
Get the fuck out.
So wait a second. to me, targeted means something different than what I just heard you define it as. I do not believe that anybody on our faculty with intent specially targets.
Exactly.
Fuck what you gotta say! Public protest. Was that not targeting people of color?
I'm sorry.
I didn't absence for people of color.
I didn't hear you at the beginning.
Your protest of day of absence, your presence taken as a protest, if you will. That's what you said in your email.
Yes.
But you're not targeting for black students.
May I answer that question?
Okay.
Wait a second. First of all, day of absence has been here longer than I have. I have never protested it until the idea. Until no.
Keep your fucking ass here.
No.
First
of all, I didn't say. Would you like to hear the answer or not?
No.
Okay.
You're
useless then. You're not learning anything. No. Chill. Listen.
Stop telling people of color they're fucking useless. You're useless. Get the fuck out.
Chill.
Fuck you.
Please.
Piece of shit.
Listen.
Somebody kick this.
Do you understand? History could pivot in this hallway right now. If we heard it. Oh my God! Listen to me. Yes, I know. History could pivot in the direction of the values that you are standing here for.
Yeah, resign.
What?
Resign.
I'm not resigning.
Okay.
If I owe an apology, I will deliver it.
Wait, hey. Bret Weinstein's got to go. Hey, hey. Bret Weinstein's got to go.
Okay, so there's more of that video. Again, we'll put the link to that down below as well if people want to watch the full piece. I guess the first part would be you woke up that morning, put on your clothes as you normally do, probably had a cup of coffee, went to work.
Well, you can see by how I was dressed that I was not expecting to end up on YouTube. So
you're right. You're teaching in shorts, okay?
I biked in that way.
Okay, you bike to work in shorts. I mean, you were just having a regular day. You had sent an email. There was beyond. I mean, I welcome everyone to read this thing. It should be very clear just by listening to you at this point. There is nothing racist in this email. You were actually fighting racism in this email. Then this happens. Just purely, what does that feel like? That moment where you realize that something has just shifted. What does that actually feel like?
That's a really interesting question. I will say that the experience in college all those years ago prepared me for this in one way. I think I learned back then that one should not be afraid to polarize, and that in fact, if you're not polarizing, you may be too timid in what you're doing, and that the really important thing to pay attention to is that you are polarizing in the correct way. That is to say, you want the people that you respect to line up with you. Now, I do find something troubling in this circumstance because there are a great many people who I think in the end, if they actually knew what I do stand for, would be aligned with me. And at the moment, they think they're on the other side because they haven't looked carefully at the policy issues in question. But it feels surreal. And in fact, that interchange that you saw was very tense. Yeah. But it got far worse very quickly. By the end of the day, it was anarchy on our campus. People were, including me, were literally being stalked and hunted. And it's a very frightening feeling.
Yeah, I mean, you can even tell by your body language. As you touch your head a couple of times, like there's almost like an exasperation of just like, I cannot believe this is real, sort of. And yet it makes sense that it's real because this monster has been growing for a long time.
It has, and it's been simmering on our campus for a full year. So before the day of absence letter, there has been a movement afoot to increase equity on our campus. And the problem, I don't want to drag us too far into a discussion of the particulars, but the definition of equity has never even been settled on. So there has been zero opportunity to discuss the proposals that have been advanced, and so the proposals are very clearly about equality of outcome, which I can't support because I know my history, and not about equality of opportunity, which I do support, and yet most of the people involved in the discussion either haven't spotted or haven't said that they even recognize the difference.
Joining me today is a sociologist, a physician, a professor at Yale University, and author of the new book, Blueprint, The Evolutionary Origins of a Good Society. Nick Christakis, welcome to the Rubin Report.
Thank you for having me, Dave.
I am happy to have you here, sir, but I'm depressed that I have to start the show the way I sort of have to start the show, and I suspect you know how I have to start the show.
Yeah.
So, do you want to set it up for me?
Well, I mean,
we do just have to get this out of the way.
I know. I mean, I knew when the book was published. I mean, I've been working on the book for 9 years, and I knew when it was published that I would have to revisit those events from 2015, which, you know, were just a challenging period of my life. Thankfully, in the past, I'm really glad to have it behind me. Yeah. But I recognize that. So you tell whatever part of it you want to tell.
Okay. So you are and were a professor at Yale.
Yes.
And this is in, I think, the fall of 2015?
Yes.
Fall of 2015. And your wife, Erica, who's also a professor, childhood development?
She was an instructor, but yes.
Yeah. She basically wrote a piece that said it was a defense of free speech, and it was sort of worked around the Halloween costume idea that, you know, you should wear what you want, but you can try to be respectful of people, but, you know, we shouldn't have some sort of top-down version where people, you know, administrators or professors are telling students what to wear. You offered her a bit of a defense on that, and now I'll throw to the clip. Is that fair? Fair? Okay, let's throw to the clip.
You don't need to bend down.
I'm not bending. What's your name?
I don't want to. I do not want to shake your hand. I do not want. I do not respect you.
I don't hear that.
I'm looking at the smirk in your face, and I'm disgusted.
Okay.
I am sick. And I'm sick watching them argue with you after we've been standing outside literally for at least 5 to 6 hours between you and Holloway. Between last night to now, we've been arguing with people who are not willing to be listened to for a long time, and all I see from you is arrogance and ego. I am sick looking at you. I am disgusted watching Lex argue with you. You were not listening. You were disgusting. I don't think you understand that. And before I was not angry, per se. I was disappointed maybe. I thought maybe there was room for an apology. You've clearly told us that you do not plan to offer an apology for your words. You left the meeting last night to go home and then tweet, do not interrupt me, to tweet from your Twitter and then the Silliman's Twitter. You showed no remorse. You tried to let your wife leave that conversation without having answered for herself. That is disgusting. That is sick. And now, I wasn't angry before. I was not angry before, but now I am actually angry, sir. I really, do not interrupt me. I was not angry, and now I want your job to be taken from you. I don't want you to have this job. I am disgusted knowing that you work at Yale University, where I will get my degree, where I will look back and think I have to argue with you.
All right,
don't,
so, it's my turn now.
Sir,
it's my turn now.
Don't do it. Don't do it, sir. Do not do it. This is not the day. You do not want to play this game with me. Do you understand what I'm saying? You don't want to play this game with me. Okay? Understand that. Look me in my face, first of all, and understand that you are such a disappointment to this university, to your students, to yourself, to the things that you claim to agree with. You want free dialogue? You want free speech? This is how it works. Someone speaks, you listen. You do not cut them off. You do not do these condescending gestures. You do not smirk. You look them in the face and you wait. You wait until it is your turn.
Okay, so before we even dive into that, the second we played the clip, you let out a big exhale. You're just not that interested in this anymore.
Yeah.
Or it's depressing to look back at.
Both are true. It's, you know, it's, I was in the courtyard for 2 hours and 15 minutes, from 4 to 6:15. About an hour of footage has been released from 5 or 6 different vantage points. You showed one clip that's typically not the clip that's shown. So many people put stuff online. You can piece together the whole hour between 5 and 6. For the first hour that I was out in the courtyard, I listened quietly to the students. You know, there's a lot of stuff that young woman said that's just factually wrong. She's alluding to an event that occurred the night before at the Afro-American Cultural House at Yale, where there was a huge event with hundreds of students. It had been announced at the beginning that we would have to leave that event. At the conclusion, it was, I can't remember the precise timing, but I think it was scheduled from 6 to 8. My wife had to teach a class from 7 to 9, so in the evening, so she told her students she'd be late and we'd stay from 6 to 8. She did, in fact, speak to the crowd. She had to leave to teach, and we had a student in the hospital, actually, that evening that I was responsible for, and that also was known. So when she said that we tried to leave, that's false. You know, I think that many of the students were swept up in a kind of a mob fervor. I think they behaved badly. They should have known better. I think they were trying to assert power. If I had a tool when I was that age that could get grown-ups into trouble, right? You know, probably I would just kept doing it nonstop.
Right.
You know?
And they have found a tool, and
yes.
they often are doing it.
Yes.
Nonstop.
Yes. And so. But so I think what distressed me is I think at some point in the background of that footage that one of the administrators, actually the author, what happened is a man by the name of Burgewell Howard had moved from Northwestern University to Yale and had assumed a new position there. And he had written an email, he had written a memo while at Northwestern admonishing students not to wear offensive costumes. And I should say for the record that many of the costumes that he or anyone else would find offensive, I too would find offensive. I wouldn't like these costumes. I'm well aware of the long history of racism in our society. I'm well aware of the ways in which there's trafficking in certain cultural tropes that put down other groups. I reject, I have a very pro-immigrant policy, belief system. I think that anyone can be an American. I love the idea that we have open borders. You know, I mean, I have a whole set of beliefs that are around openness and welcome and inclusion.
So you're a lefty.
Yeah, I am I am a lefty. I'm left of center political. I mean, I have some conservative ideas, some libertarian. I think of myself as a classical liberal, and I think of myself as very pragmatic in policy making. So I like markets to address most allocation of goods, but I also am very concerned about market failures, and then I want government intervention. Anyway, so that man who was then had moved to Yale, and then he took out of mothballs this email that he had sent at Northwestern 5 or 10 years earlier, got a bunch of Yale administrators to sign it, and then sent it off. And in it, he had links to approved and non-approved costumes. The very costumes which were deemed to be offensive, in his email, there were links to lots of those ostensibly offensive costumes. And the students, there had been a lot of conversation at the time. The New York Times had a big piece, like the previous month, about the growing use of Halloween costume advice at American colleges. So it was in the zeitgeist. This was his email was the third email that had been sent out telling students, giving them advice. So in my wife's class, many of the students in the class and other students in the college where the sub-part of Yale that we were responsible for, had told her that they felt this was very infantilizing, and they didn't really need advice on what to wear. And so my wife, from a developmental perspective, wrote a response to this email, which itself was signed by 13 administrators. It was framed as guidance, but it sort of had the color of law. And so she wrote a response saying, and her intellectual point was not wear whatever you want. Right. Her intellectual point was, do you students at Yale in your 20s, late teens, early 20s, really need older adults to tell you what to wear, provide you guidance? You should think about that and decide whether you really, and apparently many students did want such guidance. And so then thereafter, all hell broke loose, and I was in that courtyard and did the best I could.
Yeah. What do you make of, the reason we chose that clip was because there is the other more famous clip of the girl really berating you.
There were many, there were dozens.
I mean, that was the one that I think we showed here, and I think that's the most viral one. But I thought that one was interesting because the angle was a little different, and you could see some of the other kids, and the either tears or the look of horror, or all of these things, when you actually didn't do anything.
Yes. Well, that's another whole topic. I think that, many people have analyzed those events, and honestly, I don't know if I have anything to add to those analyses. I think that the thing that was very interesting to me, So one of the ideas that I've been thinking about for a long time is this tension between our individuality and our groupishness. And we have evolved to, first of all, it's a very interesting idea. We've evolved to be individuals. So we humans have unique identities. So we have unique faces. So you can look at it, see a people, and can tell who's who. And not only do we have the ability to signal our uniqueness, we use our faces for that, but we have the cognitive apparatus to detect that uniqueness. So you can have a lot of brain power that you allocate to tell who's who. So this ability to be individuals is crucial for our ability to function in groups. It's very paradoxical, because you need a capacity to tell who's my offspring, who's my friend, who do I reciprocate kindness to, who do I cooperate with, who's my enemy, all of these things. So all of these capacities of individuality are crucial to our collective expression, to our ability to live together. But equally, we have this desire to surrender ourselves to the group, to do something called to de-individuate, to form a part of a collectivity, to suppress our individual desires, which also allows us to work together. But the irony is, when you get too much of that, you get mobs, you get panics, you get, all kinds of collective phenomena that are destructive rather than constructive. So when I was in the crowd, when I was in that mob, I knew what was happening. I could tell. So one of the things I started doing is I started asking people, what's your name? And I was trying to connect to them person to person, saying, hi, I'm Nicholas. Who are you? So you're a person and I'm a person. You're not a part of this mob. You're a human being and I'm a human being. And in fact, the one thing that happened that is an intellectual idea that's part of this book that I've been working on for 10 years, but that also I made in the heat of the moment, is in the moment I said to the students, I said that I believe in our common humanity. I believe that even though this person and this person is superficially different than me, nevertheless, we can talk to each other. We all have life experiences. We're human beings. And then if you don't believe that, if you don't believe we have a common humanity, which I see as a wonderful thing.
Yeah, well, that's what the book is about.
Yes, because I'm an optimist. For the love of God, I'm an optimist. If you don't believe in our common humanity, why are you even trying to talk to me? And the students jeered, Dave. Yeah. They jeered. It's on film. They jeered. And I honestly think that's one of the most depressing things that's happened that I've ever seen, actually, is that the Yale students in the 21st century would jeer at what I regard to be a fundamental, humane, wonderful claim about human beings, is that we have a common humanity.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about academia instead of nonstop yelling, check out our academia playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, check out our full episode playlist. They're all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.